Today we're revisiting AMD's Ryzen 7 2700 and 2700X CPUs. These are from 2018. They were originally $300 and $330 or thereabouts, and a lot has changed since then. It was a simpler time. It was before the GPU pricing apocalypse, and availability apocalypse, and just general computer parts Armageddon. But the good news is that CPUs actually are one of the best value components these days, depending on what you're buying, what platform you're on. So despite some of the pricing trends elsewhere in computers, CPUs are pretty competitive at the moment. The 2700 was one of the most popular CPUs of its life cycle. It was around $200 to $250 commonly at the end of when it was being sold new. They competed most directly with Intel's 9900K that launched later in 2018, or the 8700K before that. So this content will help you see how these CPUs have aged, but also what the best either drop-in upgrade options are or the most sort of linear brand new build options are. Before that, this video is brought to you by Squarespace, and visiting squarespace.com/gamersnexus will give you 10% off your first purchase with them. We've built a number of our own websites with Squarespace, including our recently launched gamers.nexus site, where we list catastrophic PC hardware failures to inform subscribers of those failures. I built this site personally in a couple of hours by using Squarespace's Fluid Engine to move blocks around visually until I liked it. We also built our store website with Squarespace using its built-in e-commerce tools, and of course we built a website for our CEO Snowflake because she demanded our audience know who really runs the show. Get to the core of your idea and spend less time on web design by signing up at squarespace.com/gamersnexus or click the link below. This content approaches the 2700 and the 2700X specifically from a couple of different perspectives. We'll look at the 2600 and 2600X in a separate revisit, and leave your comments below for what Intel CPU you want us to look at again next. Ideally something that's at least a couple years old, because we'll run that through soon too based on the comments we get. So for the perspectives on this one, the 2700 and 2700X can, in most cases, depending on the board you're using, just be directly swapped for something higher end from a later generation, but in the same motherboard. So that's one angle, is what can we put in the board, how much performance do we get while getting the most cost-efficient upgrade possible. Maybe you do the GPU too, but you don't have to do new board, new RAM, new SSD. You probably keep the OS, don't need a new case, cooler, probably. All of that is made pretty easy and cheap. The other angle is what's the most like for like in terms of a sort of similar MSRP modern day CPU if you wanted to do a brand new build just because you enjoy the process of building new machines, or you need something that the newer motherboards offer. Maybe you're just not happy with the board you got the first time, or you're looking for something that's more along the lines of improved I/O capabilities. History first, the 2700 and 2700X are from the days when AMD was still attaching a letter X and selling it for an extra $30 to $50 on top of the base CPU price, but there often wasn't that big of a difference between the CPUs if you were willing to do, if you're experienced sometimes like a 5-minute overclock, if it was the first time you've ever overclocked the system, maybe an hour or two, if you've got some basics and fundamentals. So it was very easy to get a 2700 or 2600 and make it effectively the same performance as the X variation of that by doing an all-core OC. Now these CPUs are 8-core, 16-thread options. They had a maximum advertised turbo of 4.1 gigahertz for the 2700, or advertised up to 4.3 gigahertz on the 2700X. The common all-core overclock was around 4.0 to 4.1 gigahertz at the time. And in 2018, we never would have expected the 5800X 3D to come out and offer the performance uplift that it did on the same platform. Vertically stacked cache is a relatively new innovation, and sticking it to a newer generation of architecture, but retaining AM4 socket compatibility is what makes it so appealing. It's also still sold, which is kind of weird. I'm not sure if they are just still making it or they made that many, but it's great for people who are on AM4. So we'll mostly focus on that part as the upgrade option today. So we looked at Newegg and Amazon for US pricing. We have a couple price categories. The lowest includes some sub $200 options that we scanned eBay for some used parts to get kind of a rough estimate of where do they typically sell, just in case you are particularly budget constrained on something, but you still want a big upgrade. We have to make a few assumptions. One of them we're choosing to make is that someone who bought a 2700 might be looking to spend a similar amount today. The 2700 and 2700X were around $300 to $330 at launch. At the same price today, you could get an R7 5800X 3D, which again, we know is a gaming champion. You could also get a 5950X, but that's more expensive. That's at $463 or so, which would mostly be interesting if you're focused on non-gaming loads that are heavily multi-threaded. Another option might be the 5800X without the extra cache, saving some money at $200 to $205 now, but losing a lot of the gaming advantage. And really quick disclaimer here, the prices are changing constantly at the moment. That's because as we film this, we are approaching the world's most important day, celebrated around at least America, and it's Black Friday. As we've said before, it's our most sacred holiday of consumerism, and that means prices don't stay the same. So they might shuffle a little bit when this video goes up. But that's about where they are. The 5700X isn't in our charts today, but it's very similar to the 5800X performance, so close enough we can kind of use that as an analog. It's a bit cheaper as well. If you're okay with used, the 3700X is a much smaller upgrade than some of these, but we saw them commonly available for $90 to $100 used. The 5800X had a couple of options pop up on eBay for around $150 as well. New builds would require a much larger investment because you'll need a new motherboard, probably new RAM, and you might just go for the whole computer at that point. Same price CPU options would be the 7700X and 14600K, ignoring the motherboard cost, and the 7800X 3D is in a higher price class by pure launch MSRP to MSRP comparison, but also significantly higher performance class. There are a ton of CPUs on the market now, but also used options are everywhere. So there's some risk with buying used. You should make sure you understand those. Most of them are, you might just get screwed out of a broken part or something that's defective and you don't know it till it's too late. But it is a way to save a lot of money. So maybe worth considering if you're open to potential hassle at the benefit of some savings. As we get into the gaming benchmarks, this content requires a ton of work. If you'd like to support us and the work we do here, and as an example, our new ad-free website, gamersnexus.net, where we're publishing all of this stuff on a slight delay in written format, then go to store.gamersnexus.net. We currently have a discount of 10% on all the tools category items on our store. So that includes our driver toolkit, which is a 10-piece toolkit specifically designed for video card disassembly and teardown. We also have the large mod mats over there, like the GN15 one that we do all of our teardowns on today. They're highly rugged, anti-static conductive surfaces, and they're useful for just protecting your table. And we have our soldering and project mats, which are useful for soldering, but also just miscellaneous projects. So those are currently 10% off. You can grab them on store.gamersnexus.net. That directly funds the testing that we're doing, especially ramping into the end of the year. Let's get started. Baldur's Gate 3 is a new game that ends up being CPU loaded in most scenarios. With its 2023 launch date, it's 5 years newer than the R7 2700 CPU. We'll get CPU numbers here, but you can check our full video on GPU performance for Baldur's Gate if you need that angle. Here's the chart. In this one, the R7 2700 ran at 51 FPS average and held lows proportional to the rest of the average to low spacing. For a lot of people, this frame rate is probably completely fine in Baldur's Gate, but the venerable 2700 is finally showing its age, and in some big ways. It's getting into borderline territory here for probably a lot of players. The 2700X would offer about a 10% uplift as an in-socket upgrade, but you could also just spend like an hour doing a basic overclock on the 2700 and get to the same performance levels. We think that'd be worth it to pull another 10% out of the CPU if you don't want to do a full upgrade right now. If you went and bought a 3700X for about $100 on eBay, you'd get a boost to 60 FPS average or 17% increase over the 2700 and a 6.6% increase over the 2700X, which isn't worth it for the latter. And since you can overclock, probably not really worth it for the former either, but maybe in production. We haven't rerun the 5700X lately, but the 5800X is similar in performance as reference point. That'd get you a massive 50% uplift from the R7 2700 at 77 FPS average, with lows also pulling up strongly. For $185 to $200, the 5700X and 5800X class CPUs would be a strong single item purchase for a drop-in upgrade, but the 5800X 3D remains a stellar performer because this one ran at 106 FPS average, or basically doubling the 27 and 2700X. The X3D remains available somehow, maybe they're still making it, for around $320. There's the 56X 3D also, which we reviewed previously, so you can check our channel for that review. Even though it's technically old, or at least a prior generation, The 5800X 3D really deserves some attention if all you're doing is playing games. You'd save a lot of money by sticking with one last run of AM4. A worthwhile next-gen upgrade, at least from Intel, would have to come in the form of a 14700K, 13900K, 14900K, something like that. The 7800X 3D might make the most sense for its bigger jump, but that'd have it $100 higher than your original purchase price, if you bought it at MSRP, of your 2700. Unless we start looking at inflation, in which case it's not quite so bad. But it is better to not think about inflation. That's because it hurts to think about. This one will be short. At 1440p, we're still seeing full scaling here. Increasing the GPU load a little bit isn't affecting the results for this game. It would in other games at high settings, or especially 4K, but it's likely your 2000 series CPU will be the limiter for performance, even of new GPUs, in higher GPU load scenarios for games like this. Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty is up now. This is another game that's effectively brand new and would be possibly a driving reason for an upgrade for 2000 series owners. Features like ray reconstruction and RT overdrive might make this more of a GPU-focused upgrade, but the CPU still scales a lot in this one, and you can learn about ray reconstruction in our article on gamersnexus.net or in our video on the channel. You should really check out the articles though. They're laid out nicely and there's no ads. At 1080p medium, the R7 2700 ran at 88 FPS average and held lows at 60 and 46. That's respectable, and actually still perfectly playable. The 2700X keeps a 9.5% lead, so again, an overclock on the non-X would get you at least 10% here. If you wanted an in-socket upgrade to the best option, the 5800X 3D would give a massive 100 FPS jump. It's actually insane that these two CPUs were tested in the exact same motherboard with the same RAM and the same cooler. We really hope AMD keeps doing this with AM5, and maybe Intel will try as well, because even though it makes the board partners less money, which is the number one reason they wouldn't do it, it's certainly a lot less wasteful in terms of e-waste components, and it's better for consumers. That's a 111% uplift here. Cheaper in-socket upgrades might include a used 3700X, that'd get you 27%. Low scale comparably there. Another could be a 5800X or 5700X, with the 58X offering about a 63% improvement. For totally new platforms, the 7800X 3D offers the most at 200 FPS average, or 130% uplift. Everything else is below the 58X 3D, but will offer benefits in workstation workloads. The 14600K, 7700X, or 14700K deserve highlights as parts to consider if doing more than gaming. 1440p provides similar results, but with a truncated ceiling at 190 FPS average due to an encroaching GPU bind. So let's just move on. Starfield is up next. This is another brand new game, so we have a lot of new titles in this bench suite for your upgrade considerations. We recently ran standalone CPU and GPU pieces on Starfield, and we've published those on the website as well, so you can check those out for the full research. But for this one, here's the 1080p low chart. The 2700 ran at 51.5 FPS average when CPU bound in Starfield, so that's another lower FPS number that can actually prove relevant if considering an upgrade. Strapping an X to the end of the CPU gave it a 9% boost. In rapid order, the likely upgrade options might include a 3700X at 70 FPS average, or 35% ahead of the 2700, 5800X or 57 at 79 FPS average for the 8, or 54% ahead of the 2700, the 5800X 3D at a significantly higher 93 FPS average, or 81% ahead of the 2700, and 67% ahead of the 2700X, and the 5800X and X3D would offer a noticeable improvement in frame time consistency when looking at lows as well. New CPU upgrades could include the 7700X, which in this game is actually doing technically better than the 5800X 3D at 100 FPS average. The 7800X 3D runs at less than half the frame time on average, which is impressive, or more than double the frame rate as compared to the 2700 series. Intel's 14700K or 13700K would be the alternatives on their side, providing close to the most you can get out of a CPU in this game. F1 2023 is up next. You'll never believe this, but this game came out in 2023. Anyway, the frame rate ceiling is obscene here. At 511 FPS average for the 7800X 3D, this serves almost more as a synthetic benchmark of scaling at this point. The 2700's 177 FPS average is perfectly fine from a gameplay standpoint. From a relative scaling standpoint, though, the 2700X at 192 would provide a lessened 8% uplift. It's the same as the average OC on the 2700. The 3700X would give 31% over the 2700, or 21% over the 2700X. The 5800X 3D offers a staggering 154% uplift over the 2700, or 136% over the X SKU. If you wanted the modern I/O capabilities of a new platform, the 7800X3D would boost that to a max of 188% uplift against the 2700. The 7700X, meanwhile, without 3D cache, comes in lower than the 5800X3D again, but would get you to a new platform while still providing 130% improvement. The 147 is about the same uplift at 407 FPS average, with similar benefits of a modern platform for those who know they need them. 1440p shrinks the top end to a maximum of 400 FPS average. Scaling shrinks with that, demonstrating that GPU bottlenecks will always lessen the impact of a CPU improvement. Even still, the 2700 and 2700X are old enough that you'd still see the improvement in many scenarios. Final Fantasy XIV's benchmark test is interesting mostly because it has favored Intel CPUs for a long time now. We'll highlight the line of scrimmage. The 7800X3D and the 12900K mark the start and the end of compartmentalized AMD and Intel sections, with Intel holding a generally strong advantage. We think some of this is due to GPU driver behavior as well. 2700X leads the 2700 by 11%. The 3700X would boost over these parts by 6.7% and 19%, depending on which one. The 5800X offers a big in-socket improvement of 46% over the 2700, or 31% against the 2700X. Back to the king, the 5800X3D would give a lesser than prior, but still noteworthy improvement of 71% against the 2700s. It's not always as massive. AM5 as a new platform would limit your gains to about the same as the 58X3D here, but Intel would give significant advantages in this one. The 14900K establishes a ceiling 113% over the 2700, with the 14700K at 100% better. The 14600K is similarly boosted, and the 13 series is basically cheaper. 14 series CPUs sometimes, depends, so you should consider those too. At 1440p, the lineup is similar. There's nothing new here. The CPU limitation is still the main one, even with max graphics at 1440p. Let's move forward. Revisiting the Ryzen 7 2700 and 2700X in Rainbow Six Siege for 2023, we saw the 2700 at 295 FPS average, and the X variant 8.2% ahead at 320 FPS average. Here's a rapid list of the options in the socket. The 3700X would offer 26% over the 2700, 17% over the 2700X, and the 5800X would provide a large boost of 87% to 552 FPS average from the 2700. The 5800X3D would give a 120% uplift over the 2700 or 103% over the X, and that means the 5800X3D is so comically far ahead that its 0.1% lows are higher than the average of the 2700X. That's insane, and it illustrates exactly why X3D is such a good upgrade. Out-of-socket upgrades include the 7700X at 640 FPS average, still a doubling over some of the 2700 series CPUs, and the 7800X3D at a ludicrous 717 FPS average. Intel didn't even punch this high with APO in our recent tests. You check those separately. The 14700K would be another likely upgrade option to a new platform running at about 58X3D performance, but with newer platforms and modernized I/O. Stellaris CPU simulation time is next. This one bottlenecks hard at the top end of performance, where everything from about the 14600K and up can be considered the same. The 2700 and 2700X show huge room for improvement though. At 57 seconds and 65 seconds, you would absolutely notice a halving of the simulation time by moving to a newer CPU. This isn't just frame rate. We're not arguing over if you can notice 60 versus 50 FPS. This is a noticeable amount of physical real time. The 5800X3D would provide a cut of 48% time required from the 2700, holds an advantage over the 5800X non-3D as well, despite a lack of similar scaling at the top end of the chart. The 7700X and 14600K would be new platform alternatives worth considering. Now we're moving to production benchmarks. This section will move fast. We're looking at compression, decompression, Photoshop, Premiere, Blender rendering, things like that. We'll also talk about power and power efficiency. And in the production benchmarking, the 5800X3D won't be as promising as it has been in gaming. Blender is up first, using the tile-based renderer to fully load all threads available. The R7 2700 required 27 minutes to render a single frame of the GN logo. The best result here is the 7950X, which reduced the time required by 76%. To put that into perspective, in this test, you could render 4.2 frames on the 7950X for every single frame you render on the 2700. That's a huge improvement. Reducing the required time really matters here. The 2700X was 12% better than the non-X, with the 3700X improving speed by 28% over the 2700 and obviously less over the X. The 58X3D doesn't see a benefit from the cache here. If you went with the 5900X or 5950X as an in-socket upgrade for more production-focused builds, you could get maximally a 63% reduction in time per render. That's great for users who do less gaming and more of this kind of work. New builds would offer a 70% time cut with the 14700K at 8 minutes as compared to the 2700. Next is compression testing using 7-zip. This is useful if you do a lot of file compression. The 2700 completed 56,000 MIPS or millions of instructions per second. That has the 2700X as 11% faster, with the 5800X offering a 68% improvement over the 2700. Going up to a 5950X on the same socket would offer a 148% faster compression time over the 2700. A new platform would need movement to a 7900X or 14700K to get meaningfully above the 5950X, unless you just need other features of new boards. Decompression shuffles the stack a bit. The 2700 and 2700X run at 77,000 and 89,000 MIPS respectively. It'd be worth overclocking the 2700 for this kind of performance if you're staying with it. If you're going new though, the 7700X would offer a significant improvement, although the 5950X is impressively far ahead for its age. And again, it ran on the same board as our 2700. The best new Intel option here would be the 14900K, but it's priced in a different bracket. The 14700K and 14600K are hard to get excited about as compared to the 5950X and 5900X. We're almost through. Adobe Premiere CPU benchmarking with the Puget Suite has the 2700 at 454 points in aggregate, tied with the 3600 and giving the 2700X its standard 9% advantage. The 5800X has a 33.7% improvement in the same socket. The 5950X is a bit above that, and for a new build, a 7700X would get you a 62% increase in performance as opposed to the 2700. As Premiere users, that's a pretty big change. It's not shown on this chart, but the biggest point for improvement in this aggregate score was in the intra-frame and the raw performance. On the Intel side, the 14600K would give a 65% uplift, with a 13700K and 14700K at 76% and 81% better. Finally, in Adobe Photoshop, the chart leaders in the 1500 to 1600 point range show scaling room approaching 2x improvements. Extra cache isn't really helping in this one, but the 7700X at 1569 points sees its biggest contribution in the filter score and the GPU score as compared to the 2700. The GPU can be better leveraged here, and it's just better at filtering. Almost anything would be an upgrade for this one other than maybe an R5 3600. And the last two charts. For power consumption, the R7 2700 pulled about 76 watts for an all-core workload. Our overclock, a long time ago now, was a bit over the top back in the day, pushing it to 180 watts but improving performance notably. You could fine-tune that lower. Our goal back then was just to get the highest clock we could stably. The biggest improvement in modern CPUs, though, is the efficiency. Despite outright higher stock power consumption in something like a 7700X at 148 watts or a 58X3D at 108 watts, the output per watt is much higher. CPUs in the 14 series are huge power consumers, especially the 14900K at 287 watts and the 147 at 284. And here's that power efficiency chart. This is judged using Blender render time against the power consumed, or the energy consumption. The unit of measurement is watt hours. In terms of energy efficiency, the 2700 33.9 watt hour result had it more efficient than a 14900K. But it's obviously far less effective in performance. So phrased a different way, the 14900K will complete more work in much less time, but with a given fixed unit of work, the 2700 will require slightly less energy doing it. The 7700X offers a notable improvement here at 31.1 watt hours. The 5950X remains one of the most efficient CPUs we've ever tested, with thanks to its fine-tuned and low V-core. The answer here is pretty obvious. For those of you who don't need to fulfill the all-new stuff, fun of computer building itch, the 5800X3D is clearly the best last chance upgrade for a large punch in gaming performance. In production, it's still pretty strong, certainly stronger than the 2700 and 2700X, so across the board it's an improvement. You could consider something like a 5950X. Gets a little weird just because the pricing's higher there. You're in the 400s at that point. It is a good CPU. It's extremely efficient. But also, if you're a production user who would be eyeing that over 5800X3D, chances are probably you're trying to make money with your computer. And if that's the case, then there's a whole separate discussion to be had about modern 7000 series or Intel CPUs, something like a 7950X from AMD. But for gaming, the 5800X 3D is a clear winner to us, and a little bit cheaper than that, 5700X, which again wasn't in our charts, but is highly relevant and comparable to the 5800X non-3D for performance. That would be another good one to consider. That would be the lowest hassle possible upgrade, other than maybe just overclocking your 2700 if you haven't done it already. A new GPU would give you the most possible efficiency with the 5800X 3D in terms of performance per dollar. So if you're trying to go for, basically it feels like a completely new system for gaming without spending completely new system money, you replace 2 parts, hopefully. Keep an eye on the power supply. Go look up what you used last time, make sure that's going to be enough. And then you'll also want to check on the cooler. But in most cases, the cooler's probably fine, and you do well with the repaste anyway. It's the power supply that'll matter more if you do a GPU swap. One reminder too, a lot of people who see decay in performance over the years forget about an important aspect, which is that the operating system gets bloated as the computer ages. So if you're trying to save as much money as absolutely possible before pulling the trigger on an upgrade, it really might be worth trying to do an OS clean install, whether that's on a different partition or you replace it, whatever. But at least in my personal experience, I think I can speak for most of the team here, a lot of times when a system gets, say, 5-6 years old, you reinstall the OS, and depending on how much bloat's accumulated, especially drivers, random applications you've gotten rid of, it can feel like an entirely new computer just because the OS starts to slow down with age. Or at least that's how it's been with Windows. And that's honestly, I think, a pretty overlooked angle here for a lot of people who are considering upgrades when they feel like the system's slowing down. So it's worth considering if you haven't before. Ultimately, the 2700 and 2700X still work well in a lot of these scenarios. They hold up decently in gaming. Some of the newer games give them a hard time, like Cyberpunk, for example, Starfield. But same priced options would be the 7700X or 14600K, roughly same price, plus or minus a bit, for modern CPUs, and both offer large uplift in performance, but nothing compared to a 7800X 3D. In gaming use cases, the biggest change you would get there is the I/O overhaul, if any of that is useful to you. If it helps you cope with it, or at least it gives us all some perspective, we did a quick inflation calculator lookup, and the $300 that the 2700 would have cost when it launched is about $370 today, US pricing after inflation, which is kind of close to a 7800X 3D. So at least the value of money has changed, but certainly performance has too. Anyway, that's all the numbers. Let us know what you want to see us revisit next so we can take a look at that for you. Please upvote each other for the different parts so we know what's popular out there, what most people have, because we want to target the things first that the most people in the audience use so we can provide the most useful information to everyone. I've got some ideas what those are, but I don't want to preload the answers. So post your comments below. We are specifically looking for CPU requests right now for additional revisits. But that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. As always, subscribe for more. You can go to store.gamersnexus.net or patreon.com/gamersnexus to help us out directly for this testing. And thanks for your support. We'll see you all next time.